Hello everybody, my name is Carly Talbot and I'm going to talk to you today about what inspires trust in brands in the free-from sector, and I'm going to give you a bit of a consumer perspective on that question. Firstly, a little bit about me. I was diagnosed with celiac disease in 2009, so I'm something of a veteran of the free-from consumer, certainly in relation to lots of people who've come to free-from more recently. As well as being celiac myself, I have two young children, both of whom have been diagnosed with cow's milk protein allergies. The little one is just 3 months, so that's new news to us. So we have a very free-from house. My poor husband has to put up with a lot of bad bread. As well as being a mum, I enjoy writing my weblog, Gluten Free Bee. I'm a self-styled celiac activist and like to campaign on free-from and allergy issues. In my spare time, I like to develop recipes and take pretty photos of food. And I fit all of that around my job as a management consultant, where I take particular interest in the marketing side of things in the health and consumer sectors. So this is a topic that's very dear to my heart for a number of different reasons. Before I move on to talk about what inspires trust in free-from brands from consumers, I thought it'd be worthwhile giving you a bit of my perspective on who free-from consumers actually are. Now, I know those of you who attended some of the earlier seminars might have seen a slightly different perspective on this, but this is how I view the world and who free-from consumers are. I split this roughly into 4 camps or 4 segments. Obviously there's some overlap between those, and there are kind of different nuances within each of these, but this is 4 rough areas that I want you to think about when I talk about what inspires trust in the free-from sector. The first group are those who have a diagnosed medical need for a free-from diet. And that's an enormous range. That can range from somebody who requires no trace allergens, so someone who has a severe allergy or in fact celiac disease like myself, all the way through to those who may avoid certain ingredients for other medical reasons, for example irritable bowel syndrome, where people may follow a diet that is low in FODMAPs. Trace allergen is less likely to upset someone like that, but they still have a defined medical need and will usually strictly adhere to their diet. When you're thinking about that group, it might be helpful to think about someone like my friend Gemma. She's a mum of a child with multiple allergies. She obviously takes protecting her child's health very seriously, and she will go to the extent of emailing chocolate bar producers to find out about their production methods and answer her questions so that she knows what's safe to eat for her child. The second camp then are those who I've termed self-diagnosed, and those are people who perceive that they have a medical need for the free-from diet, but that might not be something that's proven through diagnosis or even something that has a proven scientific basis for it. For example, the question of gluten allergy is still hotly debated. We don't know if that's a real condition outside of celiac disease, but people will follow a gluten-free diet for that purpose. Thinking about this, maybe think about my friend Simon. He's in all likelihood actually lactose intolerant, which can be diagnosed. He had a severe bout of food poisoning a number of years ago and finds now that milk products upset his stomach. So he'll drink soy milk lattes, but he'll put up with the pain for an occasional ice cream sundae. So typically, and I know it's a bit of a generalisation, but people who are self-diagnosed or don't have a medical diagnosis may adhere to their diet slightly less than those with a formal medical diagnosis. My third group then I've termed lifestylers, and this is probably the largest group, and it's those people who believe that a free-from diet benefits them physically or in terms of health, but not necessarily for any illness or for any intolerance. I find this a lot amongst people who are, for example, personal trainers or very interested in sport and fitness. They may avoid certain ingredients such as gluten due to beliefs about them making them feel bloated and inflamed. There's a PT at my gym, Gemma, who follows the paleo diet, and she believes that that kind of unprocessed diet, avoiding certain ingredients, is health-giving for her. My final group then, I've put a little barrier between because they have slightly different motivations aside from health concerns. And I've termed them ethical consumers. My friend Kate is a prime example of this. She's an absolutely evangelical vegan. And she takes her diet as seriously as someone with a severe allergy, in that she will not eat vegetarian sausages that have been cooked on the same grill as bacon. She won't even eat vegetarian sausages that have been produced by a manufacturer of meat products. So the motivations for free-from diet are very different, but their adherence to that may be as, if not more serious than some who are following a free-from diet for medical reasons. Now, the reason I think of them separately is because of their motivations, but there's actually a bit of a tension between these two camps, particularly those on the far end of the medical spectrum, so those with severe allergies and intolerances, because they recognise that broader lifestyle and ethical group have expanded our choice. I embrace the fact that veganism is so popular now because it means there's a lot more dairy-free options for me to feed my daughter if we're eating out and about. But they may or may not take contamination issues so seriously, which creates issues for those of us that need restaurants and so on to take those seriously. And it also changes the way that we're perceived as free-from consumers, in that we're making a lifestyle choice as opposed to something that's a medical necessity. So there is a bit of a tension. The reason I raise that is because each of these groups will vary in terms of size and obviously then the value to the brands. But they also vary in terms of the needs and the factors that inspire them to trust free-from brands. Someone who has a medical diagnosis and a need to avoid certain allergens, has very different needs and very different things that will make them trust a brand from someone who is choosing to for ethical reasons, for example. Now, I'm talking very much as someone in the first camp and someone as a parent of children who sit in that first camp. So for the purposes of this presentation, I'm going to speak very much with that in mind. And my belief is that that's really the core market for free-from. Yes, it may not be the largest market, but this is the market that sustains, because when you've been diagnosed with celiac disease, that sticks with you for life, and you're going to eat gluten-free for life. So if brands can get it right for that community first, that's their sustainable market, and the other markets offer growth opportunities for them. Even though they're larger, they may wax and wane with food trends and new scientific discoveries. A little plea here as well. Obviously, I've got my celiac hat on, but I know that it's very frustrating for the rest of the free-from community that free-from sector is dominated by gluten-free as an issue. Those brands that are seeing growth and doing well now are starting to recognise that there is a need to also create options that are free from other allergens at the same time, because many free-from consumers will not just avoid one allergen but will avoid multiple. So on to the big question: as a free-from consumer, what inspires us to trust a free-from brand? Well, I did a little poll amongst my community online, and absolutely no surprise to see that the biggest issue that the medical free-from community prioritises safety. Now, of course, that's the case, but what was very interesting about that is the conversation around that poll was not so much about safety as an issue, but around the theme of transparency. And that's a really important point, because safety of a product is very, very personal and very subjective. Consumers need the information to be able to decide from themselves of what's considered safe. So transparency of production methods and operations for a company are very important when free-from consumers are choosing which brands to trust. From one extreme, you might have someone who will not consider safe even anything that's packaged on the same site as the allergen. But on the other extreme, you might have a gluten-free consumer who will happily eat a piece of cake that's been handled with the same tongs as the non-gluten-free cake. So it's a very, very personal approach to safety, and trust is all about transparency of those production methods and us being able to decide for ourselves what is safe. So how do we decide what's safe? Well, transparency, a major part of that is, of course, labelling. Free-from consumers find visible prominent labelling and particularly accreditation to be a useful way to decide what to trust. Unfortunate thing is that accreditation as free from status is only actually defined legally for gluten. There's a definition that gluten has to be below 20 parts per million. And there's a licensed cross-grain symbol that can be used by Celiac UK. And vegan and vegetarian foods also have a similar accreditation badge system. Unfortunately, for other allergens, you're kind of at the whim of any particular brand as to what logo or packaging they use to denote that. So it becomes a little bit tricky, and you resort then to looking at the ingredients list. So the way the ingredients list is presented is also very important. And in terms of building trust, what we find to be very useful as free from consumers is having a very descriptive label, particularly when it comes to what's called a precautionary advisory label. So that's those may contain statements that you might see on the back of the pack. Now, if something says may contain nuts or may contain gluten, most of us usually think, that manufacturer just covering them back. They're covering their backs. There's no real risk there. It's not very descriptive. It's not very helpful. We don't really trust the label. We don't really know what sits behind it. So having a very descriptive may contain label is very helpful in terms of building trust. So something that says packaged in a facility that also packages hazelnuts and almonds, that's very specific about the part of the production process and the specific allergen, is very, very useful for us and can help us to trust that label. Now, labelling and transparency of production methods extends beyond labelling, also to the ability to communicate and respond to queries about production facilities. And that's either being responsive through social channels or helplines, or ideally simply publishing something on the website. So the chocolate manufacturer Kinnerton has a very clear statement about its nut-free facility on its website. Transparency, I'm going to stick with transparency for a moment because I think it also applies not just to production methods controls. Transparency is very important in trust in other areas in the free-from sector, specifically pricing. Anyone who's ever stumbled across the Facebook page for a gluten-free bread manufacturer will come up time and time again with the comment, but why is it so expensive? And many of us free-from consumers feel like we're being charged an unjustifiable premium for products. So having that transparency of information about the quality of ingredients and the process controls that go into making these products also helps build trust and understanding from your consumers. I think transparency extends to all parts of your communications, particularly in social media, answering questions in the channel in which they're raised, not deferring to offline means if you're faced with a complaint, and being generally open and honest about that. And I think that is particularly important when you're dealing with allergies, but actually is increasingly extended to the whole food industry, especially in wake of things like the horse meat saga a few years ago. Moving down my list, quality and reliability are my next two, and they are also major factors in building free-from consumer trust. I mentioned about the premium price that some of these products command. The market has made major leaps in terms of branding and the quality of products. To be honest, it just needs to befit the premium product status. It's no good paying £4 for a loaf of gluten-free bread if it's full of holes and you can't use it for the purpose it's intended. And consistency of quality continues to be a major issue in free-from, particularly in bread and fresh products. Reliability extends not just into the quality of the product, but also to the reliability of supply. Celiac UK have tirelessly campaigned in supermarkets for reliability of supply of some staple products such as bread, pasta, flour and cereals, because people often bemoan the empty free-from shelves that they're faced with on a Monday morning, particularly now that we increasingly rely on that supermarket provision to get on with normal life, particularly with withdrawal of gluten-free prescriptions and even dairy-free milk products in some CCGs. So the supermarkets are a real lifeline to maintain a normal lifestyle, and reliability of supply is key. The trust that we place in free-from doesn't extend to the brands, but also to the retailers. And a number of retailers have done a lot of work to improve their free-from selections. The one little bugbear we find is that all too often we'll find a brand that we really rely upon being stocked in a supermarket that will meet our particular needs and allergens that we need to avoid. And we'll return to the supermarket to get it, to find out that the supermarket's replaced it with an own brand alternative that isn't free from the same allergens. And it feels a little bit like they're playing games with our loyalties, testing out products, finding what sells, and then deciding to make more money themselves. And if there's one thing that we hate, it's feeling like we're being taken advantage of. What underpins all of these? Well, actually, it's something that isn't unique to the free-from sector. It's consumer intimacy. It's absolutely vital for building trust with your consumers. It's that feeling that a brand understands me, my needs, and it demonstrates that in the way that it operates and the products that it sells and the way that it communicates to me. The world today is increasingly personal, and we have an expectation that products and services are tailored to meet our needs, and that extends to health products and free-from products. So brands really need to understand who their core market is. Are they out to meet free-from consumer needs for people who have diagnosed allergies, or are they more after that kind of lifestyle, healthy aura type market? And what are the different needs that each of those groups have? Recognising that free-from is not a homogenous sector is really important. The dairy allergic child who wants to fit in at a kid's party has very different needs from someone who's a vegan adult or someone who's following the paleo diet. So a one-size-fits-all to your gluten-free menu in a restaurant or your product launch is not going to work. And the use of marketing and service channels to demonstrate that understanding is what builds trust through the deeds and the language that you use, even the language. So when I go to a restaurant and the waiter offers me the celiac menu rather than the gluten-friendly menu, I know that they understand my needs and they understand I have a medical condition and are likely to take cross-contamination seriously. Being a member of the community and not just somebody marketing to the community is very important, because people trust people. And the reason that the free-from sector is dominated by so many small homegrown brands is because they're run by people who have a genuine care and interest in the community and are probably from our community themselves. So anything big brands can do to emulate that, and often those big brands have grown out of those small brands or have incorporated those small brands, continue to create that personal feel and help us to understand who the people are behind the brand through social channels and marketing. That can really help to build trust. Also understand that you're often dealing with people who see themselves as patients versus consumers. And that's going back to my previous point about the fact that, we hate feeling like we are a market segment to be marketed to and taken advantage of versus a patient with a need and who needs to be cared for. A few examples then of what happens when trust is eroded in the free-from sector. Well, as with any consumer product, if you don't have the trust of your consumers, if you have a poor brand image, it results in reduced loyalty, in loss of market share. You're ultimately not going to sell your product. I think the difference with the free-from sector is that we have a heavy reliance on the products to feel normal and to get on with our day-to-day lives. And when it goes wrong, customers will mobilise against you. And there are, in fact, campaigns that have been on social media in past years against certain bread manufacturers and milk manufacturers who have either changed their formulation or have not produced a quality, reliable product. And the customers have actually come together and publicised the fact that we're not happy with this, and not just stopped buying, but actively discouraged others from buying those products as well. It's different because the worst case scenario is not that you don't sell product. The worst case scenario, if you get it wrong, is that someone gets ill or someone even dies from a reaction to an unintentional ingredient. So it's a high stakes industry, but get it right and you win loyalty for life. So it's really worth making that effort. So a few examples of getting it right. What should free-from brands do? Well, these are things I said before, but here are some great examples. Identifying your target audience and finding out their pain points is really key to building loyalty. Someone who's done this really well recently is a big supermarket, Tesco. They've clearly done their market research because they keep winning Retailer of the Year at the Free From Food Awards. And that's down to the fact that they've started to understand that people who avoid dairy quite often avoid egg. People who avoid gluten quite often avoid dairy. And what a kid wants above all is when they go to a kid's party to be able to eat cake and have an ice cream in a cone like everyone else. So their range is really catering to those specific pain points, and they're painting themselves as very much a kind of family retailer who understands what people in the free-from sector need. And they keep popping up with new launches, so top marks Tesco. Secondly, invite consumers into your business. So this is the point about transparency again. I mentioned Kinnerton earlier and their clear statement about their production controls. Warburton's actually went one further a couple of years ago and invited a number of different free-from bloggers into their factory and showed us their production methods and controls, helped us to understand why the products were so expensive, and we could then spread the message amongst our fellow consumers. So even that kind of physical inviting customers in was very, very powerful. I talked about being part of the community and being a person, and in that community helping us to see the people behind the brand and that they care about us. And this is shown time and time again by countless small brands that we find about, usually through the internet or from free-from trade shows. And here I'm thinking about people like Coco Libre or Podology, smaller brands who are now starting to break into supermarkets, who started up as people with allergies and dietary needs themselves, who have grown up as part of the community and we trust and spread the word about. And then finally, I mentioned about labelling products clearly and ambiguously. Another big example for you here is Marks and Spencer, who cause some frustrations around their nut allergy labelling, but do have a very clear system where they will have a flash on the pack if they update the allergen information. They'll say allergy updates, and they have very specific statements about may contain, such as this product is not suitable for celiacs due to manufacturing methods, which helps us to understand that this is not just a cover your back may contain statement. So some great examples there. I've got countless more. Please do talk to me if you want one that's relevant for your particular brand. But overall, people buy from people. So, be a person, not just a brand. Engage on social media and be a part of the community. So that's a whistle-stop tour of the consumer perspective. I hope that you found that interesting and useful. If you're a free-from consumer yourself, I hope that some of those points resonated. If you're a brand, I hope that gave you some pointers. I'm happy to take any questions. Please stay in touch either through social media or my email. You can find me on all the usual channels where I'm at G3B, and my blog is glutenfreebee.com, where I'll be popping slides and some more details of this talk as soon as the event is finished. Thank you.